Imagine living in paradise, sun-kissed beaches, tropical sunsets, and the freedom to chase your dreams. That was Alexandra Saper's life in Bali, at least on the surface. To the world, she was a glowing American influencer, smiling for the camera in one of the most beautiful places on earth. But behind those perfect photos was a secret that would slowly turn her paradise into a prison. For 2.5 years, a shadow followed her. A man she had never invited into her world. A man who seemed to know where she was, what she was doing, even what she feared. He wasn't just watching online. He was determined to destroy her life. He sent threats. He claimed he would abduct her. And then he did the unthinkable. He flew across the world, just to prove that she could never escape him. When Alexandra turned to the police, begging for help, they told her something chilling. Quit social media. This is not just the story of an obsessed stalker. It's the story of how one woman's dream life became a nightmare, and how the very systems meant to protect her left her exposed until it was almost too late. Stay with me, because once you hear the full story, you'll never look at influencer life the same way again. The sun dipped low over the turquoise waters of Bali, casting long streaks of gold across the shore. To most people, this was paradise, a place where dreams came alive, where the worries of the world melted into waves and warm sand. For Alexandra Saper, it should have been the same. She was an American lawyer turned travel influencer who had traded corporate gray suits for flowing dresses, passport stamps, and a life full of freedom. Her Instagram was alive with color, sunsets, temples, laughter, and the promise of escape. But behind every perfectly framed photo was a growing shadow. It started with a message, then another, and another. At first, they seemed harmless, an admirer complimenting her smile, her adventures, her writing. Alexandra had grown used to attention online. But soon, the messages shifted from kind words to demands, from polite greetings to chilling threats. The man behind the screen didn't just want to watch her life. He wanted to own it. As the months stretched into years, Alexandra began to notice him everywhere. In comments, in emails, in her DMs. He seemed to know her routines, her favorite cafes, even the places she visited in real time. "You can't hide from me," he wrote once. "I'll be there." At night, when the streets of Bali were quiet and only the hum of scooters echoed in the distance, Alexandra would lie awake listening for footsteps outside her villa. Sometimes she convinced herself she heard them, slow, deliberate, circling. Other nights, she would scroll through his latest threats until her chest tightened with dread. What made it worse was not just the stalking itself, but the silence of those meant to protect her. When she went to the police, desperate and trembling, they dismissed her. "Maybe just stop posting online," one officer suggested with a shrug, as if her life's work, her passion, her career could be abandoned so easily. For Alexandra, Bali, the island that had once been her sanctuary, was transforming into a prison with invisible bars. She was trapped between her dream and her nightmare, between the beauty of the life she had built and the darkness of the man determined to destroy it. And she had no idea that this ordeal would last 2.5 years. 2.5 years of fear, of obsession, of being hunted by someone who refused to let go. But Alexandra wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter. And her story, the story of how she survived, was only just beginning. The man's name was Derek Todd. At least that was one of the names he used. Online, he slipped in and out of identities like changing masks at a masquerade. Sometimes he appeared as a devoted fan. Sometimes as a jealous critic. Other times, he spoke as if he knew Alexandra personally, writing in ways that made her skin crawl. At first, Alexandra brushed it off as the cost of online fame. Social media influencers lived with trolls. But this was different. This wasn't some faceless account lost in the noise. This was a presence that followed her across platforms, across continents, across time zones. He wasn't just watching. He was plotting. One night, Alexandra received an email that froze her blood. "I'm coming to Bali," it read. "You can't run anymore." It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. He was no longer content to hide behind screens. Weeks later, Alexandra spotted him for the first time in real life. She had gone to a cafe she loved, tucked away in the heart of Canggu. As she set her camera down after snapping photos of her smoothie bowl, she noticed a figure lingering by the entrance. A man, pale, heavy-set, his eyes fixed on her like prey. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to twist the air, to send her chest into a panic. From then on, Bali stopped being a postcard. It became a labyrinth of paranoia. Every scooter that trailed too long behind her, every unfamiliar face in a cafe, every knock on her villa gate. Could it be him? And yet, the authorities shrugged. He hasn't touched you, they told her. It's just words. But to Alexandra, those words were knives. Words that turned her island dream into a nightmare of constant vigilance. Her friends told her she was imagining things. Some said she was too sensitive, too caught up in her online life. But Alexandra knew. She felt the weight of being hunted, of being mapped out by someone who saw her not as a person, but as an object to claim. The worst part? He was relentless. 2.5 years of messages, appearances, threats. 2.5 years of living in a reality where freedom existed only in photographs, not in the beating of her heart. What Alexandra didn't know was that Derek wasn't just watching, he was preparing. And the day was coming when he would cross a line that no one could ignore. Alexandra had once called Bali her safe haven. The ocean waves, the sunlit mornings, the easy laughter of fellow travelers. It had all been her escape from a corporate job back in the U.S. She had left behind long commutes and cubicles for freedom. But now, the island was a cage, and she was the prisoner. Every day, the sense of being watched grew heavier. At cafes, she found the same stranger sitting 2 tables away, pretending to read. At yoga classes, she swore she saw his reflection in the mirrors, only for him to slip out before she could confront him. At night, she'd hear footsteps outside her villa, soft, deliberate, waiting. But when she'd beg for help, the police gave her the same dismissive response. Stop posting. Quit social media. He'll get bored. Quit? To Alexandra, those words cut deep. Her platform wasn't just her career, it was her voice, her independence, the life she had built for herself. Why should she be the one to disappear when he was the one doing wrong? Yet the system made it clear. Her safety was negotiable, her freedom expendable. And so Alexandra tried to live with the fear. She posted less. She avoided her favorite spots. She triple-locked her doors and learned to scan every room she entered. But the more she retreated, the more he pressed in. The stalker began leaving little signs, subtle, chilling reminders that he was near. A flower on her scooter seat. A note slipped under her door with nothing but a smiley face drawn in ink. A comment on her latest Instagram photo that quoted the exact words she had spoken in a private phone call the night before. That was when she realized this wasn't just about social media. He was closer than she thought. He wasn't just following her online. He was inside her world, studying her life like a puzzle he meant to solve. And Alexandra knew if no one stopped him, eventually, he would take the final step. The constant fear began to consume Alexandra's daily life. Sleep was a luxury she no longer knew. Every creak of her villa made her heart race. Even the joyous sound of motorbikes outside turned sinister in her mind because she couldn't shake the thought. What if it's him? The stalker had escalated from shadows to direct threats. Emails arrived at dawn, each one colder than the last. One read, "I'll be waiting when you least expect it." Another, more terrifying, "If I can't have you, no one will." For 2.5 years, Alexandra lived in this cycle of fear. She tried to reach out to lawyers, to expats who had dealt with crime in Bali, to anyone who would listen. But the responses were always the same. The law moves slowly. Don't provoke him. Stay low. The lowest point came when she discovered he had booked a flight just to follow her across continents. That was when the illusion of safety shattered completely. He wasn't just a digital phantom or a man lurking in alleys. He was willing to leave his home, his country, his entire life behind just to get closer. Alexandra realized then, this wasn't obsession anymore. It was possession. And unless someone intervened, the story would not end with him watching from a distance. It would end with him taking her life. The final straw pushed Alexandra to go public, to use the very platform the police told her to abandon. She spoke openly about the stalking, sharing her experience online. The risk was huge. Exposing herself could make her even more of a target. But silence had failed her. Maybe her voice could save her. And she was right. Her story caught attention, sparking outrage. For the first time, the spotlight shifted from her stalker's games to the system that had failed her. A slow, grinding machine of justice began to move, and finally, after 2.5 years of terror, her nightmare reached a courtroom. But before the world would see him in chains, Alexandra would have to relive every chilling detail of her trauma on the stand. The day Alexandra stepped into the courtroom, it felt like the air itself was heavier. For 2.5 years, she had lived with fear pressing down on her chest. But this was different. Now, instead of hiding, she stood before judges, lawyers, and strangers, ready to speak the truth that had nearly broken her. The man who had tormented her sat just feet away. No longer the faceless phantom behind screen, no longer the shadow lurking outside her villa. He was flesh and blood, shackled but still radiating menace. His eyes met hers for the first time in years. That single glance carried every night of terror, every sleepless hour, every moment she thought she might not survive. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the witness stand. But when she began to speak, her voice grew stronger. She told the court about the emails, the threats, the way he followed her across oceans. She described the fear of not knowing when he would appear. And then the silence in Bali, when the police told her to quit social media instead of protecting her. Every word was heavy, but every word was also power. For once, Alexandra wasn't the hunted. She was the one exposing the hunter. The prosecution presented evidence, flight records, surveillance photos, digital trails of his harassment. Piece by piece, the mask he had worn fell away. The man who had stalked her for over 2 years was no longer the mysterious figure he wanted to be. He was exposed as a predator. And for Alexandra, that moment, watching him shrink under the weight of undeniable truth, was the first time she felt freedom flicker back into her life. But even as the gavel echoed through the courtroom, Alexandra knew her story wasn't just her own. It was a warning about how obsession can grow unchecked when systems fail, and how survival sometimes depends on finding the strength to stand up when the world tells you to stay quiet. When the trial ended, Alexandra stepped outside the courthouse into the crisp air. For the first time in years, she could breathe without the weight of fear pressing on her chest. It wasn't that the scars of her ordeal disappeared. They remained etched into her memory, haunting her in quiet moments. But something had shifted. She had reclaimed her life. The stalker who once dictated her every move was no longer in control. The whispered threats, the footsteps behind her, the constant shadow, gone. What remained was the story of survival, and Alexandra was determined to share it so others would never feel as alone as she once did. She returned to Bali months later, standing barefoot on the same beach where she had once felt imprisoned by fear. Now, the waves carried a different sound, not of danger, but of freedom. She took a deep breath, raised her camera, and pressed record. Her voice shook slightly, but her words were clear. "This is not just my story," she said to her growing audience. "It's a reminder of what happens when systems fail to protect victims, and why we can't stay silent. I'm here because I refuse to give up, and because eventually someone listened." Her message resonated worldwide. Women reached out to her from across the globe, sharing their own experiences, their own fears, their own triumphs. Alexandra had become more than an influencer. She was an advocate, a voice for those who had been silenced. She still carried the scars of her 2-year nightmare. But those scars, she realized, were not just wounds. They were proof of her resilience. Proof that even in the darkest moments, survival was possible. And as she walked along the shoreline, the sun dipping below the horizon, Alexandra smiled, not because the past was gone, but because she had finally taken her future back. For more true crime stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this.